Hello everybody! Welcome to Unit 18 of this Economics is for Everyone course. So what are we up to today? We're going to be looking at real-world application of economics. So we've been on quite a journey. So first of all, I also want to do a quick recap of what we've done so far. So at the beginning, we started off talking about observing our own activity in regards to what we do, regards to other people and the world in general. So this is basically observation of behaviour that could imply the usage of economics somehow. Then we talked about economic theory. We did about another 3 or 4 more units of economic theory. Then we went back and we revisited the real world again, our observations, and then we looked at how that theory can apply. Then we continued to discuss a few more economic theories. So you got to see me here hanging out in the office, and also I think you got one voiceover there. So now we're going to be looking at economics in the real world. This is only going to be, well, 1 unit, I guess, officially if you want to call it. And then that's going to then spread out into what we call the dark side of economics. So 2 units of that. And then I'm going to be talking about how economics can make life better. So effectively that's about 5 units of application if you want to call it. So as you can see here, that whole blue area, that is where we're going to be at the moment. And then after that, we'll go on to the final assessment. So stay tuned, got some interesting stuff still to talk about and cover. So let's start off looking at the world in general. So we have the question of who. Who? You? Me? You? No, what I'm talking about is who in regards to who should be in control of production, who should be in control of how the economy operates. And generally there's 2 schools of thought on that. One should be a bigger role for the government, one should be a bigger role for free markets. So when you look at government, they come in and they make decisions on what the people need, basically what we should have. And how they go about doing it, they often build things like your infrastructure, they often provide services such as healthcare or police force and military. And there'll be things that they'll claim that the market cannot provide for. But there is sort of a grey area where certain things are provided by the government, like for example transportation and education, healthcare, and even certain other types of infrastructure as well, which can be done by both the private sector and the public sector. So we take a look at free markets. So what have we got there? So basically you take the government out of the picture and you let the market decide how our needs and wants should be addressed. So if there's a need, effectively, or if you call it a demand, a need and a want, that would be the demand, they will be met with some form of supply, because if people want something, they'll be willing to pay for it one way or another. And if someone's willing to pay for something, and then there'll be a provision of that service by a private entity. Though some may argue certain things can't be sufficiently supplied by private entities, the market itself, simply because there's not enough money or profit in it. Or there could be activities that have a lot of externalities. You remember that one? Externalities, positive externalities, so therefore the market doesn't address them fully. And then you'd be swinging back to the argument that maybe government should come in there. So most economists will find themselves in a position of supporting some things by government, some things by the market. For myself, I may have stated this before, I support more of the market, meeting our needs and wants, and the government having a more limited role. But there's pros and cons around both sides of that argument. Okay, so whom are we producing for? Who should be getting things? So again, there's different schools of thought in regards to that. Should everybody have access to everything? Or should the people with the most money have access to things? Those with the most wealth? Should it be those people that are willing to take the risk? Should it be your entrepreneurs? Should they get the bigger rewards? Shouldn't it be your employees, the people that do most of the work themselves? Should they be entitled to more of the rewards? So who is getting the money, you might say? Who is getting the larger the share of the resources? And that is not, let's say, easy question to answer, but there are certain rules in economics that can be applied to that. And this takes us back to my market structure models. So you take, for example, oligopolies and monopolies, then most of the money is going to be people that are the entrepreneurs, shall I say. The people that have invested in the capital because they have greater control over the price, have greater control over the quantity, they're able to reap more of the rewards, and the employees will probably get less. Whereas you look at a market more like perfect competition, monopolistic competition, then the employees and the owners, because there's lots and lots of firms, they sort of mould into one a little bit more. So again, it still goes to the owners, but if you're actually working at the same time, it goes to you as well. So it's a different distribution, and this is both done by the market, and a lot of that depends on the barriers to entry. And often the government themselves actually intervene and create barriers to entry by only allowing particular firms to sell a particular good. And in some case they allow patents, for example, so that allows oligopolies to build up structures and maintain the wealth with the richer people. So a lot of what people see as market failures by the market itself is often caused by intervention by the government itself. So it's an interesting argument, isn't it? Alright, next question is how? How are we going to produce something? So we've looked at the who and whom's getting it, so how are we going to go about doing it? So there's a lot of different ways of things to... So the most talked about argument, I think, comes around about automation and about employment. Do you hire more people? Do you develop more capital? And we talk about that in terms of economic growth. Take, for example, when I talked about macroeconomics, you got the Swan-Solar growth model. And that looks at ratios of capital and labour and what combination that's best. Normally, you'll want some capital and you want some labour, all working together. If you've got an entire workforce, just all people basically just doing stuff, and you have no technology, no machinery or whatever, then it's not going to be efficient. If you have all machinery and no people, it may not necessarily be efficient as well, because there's going to be high replacement costs for that machinery. But also, we can't underestimate the power of improved technology and constant improvement in that technology. And again, that could lead to a problem of overinvestment in one particular technology, which could easily go out of date. So it is an interesting balancing act about how production should take place, whether it's more capital or more labour. And you can't forget as well the other factors of production: land, and the one I consider possibly the most important is the entrepreneur. And again, you can look at market structure, as I mentioned, going back to market structure because I consider that important. You have monopolistic competition and perfect competition where you have more entrepreneurs than you and they also serve the purpose of actually being the workers as well. Another how issue, I'm going to expand that a little bit, is we look at open markets open economies versus closed economies. So I've talked about this before. If you have an open market, an open economy, that means you're trading with countries, lots of different countries. There'll be certain limits to that. I don't think any country is completely open. There'll be certain countries that can do less trade with, because to be completely open, it requires like no tariffs or whatever, completely free trade, which you generally don't see. But it is one of those things that if every single country believes in free trade, then it could be a good arrangement. But the problem comes in when you have certain countries that impose tariffs. And potentially, if there's free trade everywhere and one country starts putting down some tariffs, they could potentially benefit from that as they start protecting their own industries. But the biggest problem with that is once one country, especially if it's a major country, a big country like the United States, they will then start getting some form of retaliation. And then you have, starting with these trade wars and all that, and then we end up all getting worse off. And again, this comes back to another theory that I talked about, and that's game theory. So, can you see what sort of game this is? This would be what I call a prisoner's dilemma. In effect, so everybody's putting up tariffs and the world starts to become a more closed economy, which is actually far more worse than an open economy. So it's one of those things, if you have good cooperation between countries and nations, the world would be better off as an open economy. Well, right. Okay, so that takes me to the end of real-world application. This is just more of a straight-up approach to real-world application. I threw in a few theories here and there for you. The next unit I'm going to be looking at what I call dark side of economics. This is going to be something a little bit different, something many other courses probably wouldn't necessarily dare to cover, but I feel that it's good to go down this line because not everything is as it appears, and not all the time people at the top are making the right decisions for us. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, this unit. We have the usual questions, have a little go at them, and yeah, our next unit we'll be heading into the dark side. So be prepared.